For many people, Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki have almost become interchangeable terms. Miyazaki co-founded the studio, directed many of its most celebrated films, and shaped the visual language most audiences associate with Ghibli today. That association is understandable, but it's also incomplete. From the very beginning, Studio Ghibli was shaped by two fundamentally different ways of thinking about animation. And the second of those voices has often been discussed less, even though his influence runs just as deep. That voice belonged to Isao Takahata. Understanding Takahata doesn't take anything away from Miyazaki. It explains why Ghibli feels as layered, grounded, and emotionally varied as it does. What makes Takahata stand out as a director starts with how he entered animation. He wasn't trained as an animator or manga artist. He studied literature and entered the industry as a director who thought first in terms of ideas, structure, and observation. People who worked with him often described his process as verbal and conceptual. He would explain tone, pacing, and emotional intent in detail, then rely on his collaborators to discover the images that fit. And that way of working shaped his entire career. Because Takahata wasn't attached to a single technique or visual identity, he never tried to make his films look consistent. Each project became an attempt to find the right form for the question underneath it. As a result, his filmography feels unusually varied, even by Ghibli standards. You can see that immediately when you look at the films themselves. Grave of the Fireflies is restrained and observational, focused less on spectacle and more on how suffering settles into ordinary life. The film stays close to routine and everyday behavior, allowing emotion to emerge quietly rather than through dramatic emphasis. Its power comes from how normal everything feels. Only Yesterday moves in a completely different direction. It's an adult story built around memory, where childhood moments aren't treated as defining events, but as fragments that gain meaning over time. The film trusts reflection, showing how understanding often arrives years after the moment itself has passed. With Pompoko, Takahata turns to folklore and satire. On the surface, the film is energetic and playful, but underneath, it carefully tracks change, fatigue, and adaptation. The tone shifts gradually, not through speeches or commentary, but through repetition and quiet accumulation. My Neighbors the Yamadas strips things back even further. There is almost no traditional plot. Instead, the film offers family life through short, everyday moments, misunderstandings, habits, quiet affection. Meaning forms through familiarity rather than resolution. And the tale of Princess Kaguya brings Takahata's approach into its most distilled form. The animation remains loose and intentionally unfinished, drawing from traditional Japanese painting and picture scrolls. Scenes appear and dissolve, movement slows, and then stillness takes over. The film feels less like watching a story unfold and more like holding on to a memory as it slips away. What's important is that these films don't resemble each other on the surface. That range isn't inconsistency, it's intention. What ties Takahata's work together isn't genre or tone, but attention. He cared deeply about everyday life, whether it's mundane actions or routine movement. The quiet spaces where meaning usually goes unnoticed. Cooking a meal, sitting in silence, or walking without urgency. In his films, these moments aren't background detail. They're the emotional core. He believed animation was capable of observing life with the same seriousness as live-action cinema, and he trusted audiences to recognize significance without being guided toward it. That philosophy extended beyond filmmaking. Takahata spent much of his life teaching, writing, and advocating for animation as a serious cultural and academic art form. He supported animation studies, promoted international animation, and remained politically engaged, particularly around historical memory and pacifism. Those concerns don't appear in his films as arguments. They appear in what his films choose to linger on, and what they refuse to rush past. In the later years of his life, Takahata worked more slowly and deliberately. Long gaps between films weren't hesitation. They reflected how seriously he took the responsibility of form matching meaning. When The Tale of the Princess Kaguya was finally released, it felt less like a comeback and more like a distillation of everything he had spent decades refining. And sadly, Takahata passed away in 2018 at the age of 82. In the days that followed, many filmmakers and collaborators spoke less about individual scenes and more about how he changed the way they thought about animation itself. Hayao Miyazaki, in a rare moment of public vulnerability, referred to Takahata as the person he trusted most.
僕は縮小にされてしまっていた。緊張で発見に苦しむような日々が始まった。それでも組合事務所のプレハブ小屋に泊まり込んで、僕はパクさんと夢中に語り明かした。ありとあらゆること、中でも作品について。僕らは仕事に満足していなかった。もっと遠くへ、もっと深く、誇りを持てる仕事をしたかった。何を作ればいいのか、すいません。どうやってパクさんの教養は圧倒的だった。僕は得難い人に巡り会えたのだと嬉しかった。パクさん、僕らは精一杯あの時生きたんだ。膝を折らなかったパクさんの姿勢は僕らのものだったんだ。ありがとう、パクさん。55年前にあの雨上がりのバス停で声をかけてくれたパクさんのことを忘れない。どうもすいません。
Despite their often difficult working relationship, I think that response says quite a bit. Seen this way, Takahata's films aren't the serious exceptions within Studio Ghibli. They are one half of its foundation. Where Miyazaki often explores movement, imagination, and the experience of entering a world, Takahata observes how people live within the one they already have. A coexistence is why Ghibli works. One voice invites wonder and the other invites recognition. Together, they give the studio its depth.